Good evening, everybody. We'll start our briefing now. Good evening, councillors, staff, ladies and gentlemen. We wish to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land we are meeting on, the Whadjuk people. We would like to pay respect to the elders of the Noongar Nation, past and present, who have walked and cared for the land, and we acknowledge and respect their continuing culture and the contributions made to the life of this city and region. I declare the council members' briefing session open at 18:01. Recording announcement.
Thank you, Mayor. Please note that the audio proceedings of tonight's meeting will be published on the City's website tomorrow, with the exception of matters disclosed behind closed doors, for which there are none this evening, Mayor.
Thank you. And we'll go to item 1, attendances, and they are as per registered. Have we any apologies and leave of absence? I have Councillor Berry, and I know Councillor Treby is an apology for this evening. Yes, Councillor Coetzee.
I would like to put a leave of absence in from the 22nd of September until the 4th of October.
Thank you. Any other notices? Thank you. Item 3 is deputations. Do we have any deputations this evening? I can't see any. I haven't got any here.
None tonight.
Cool. So item 4, we go to reports. And our first reports come from Planning and Sustainability, and I would like the Director and acting managers to come and share what they want from their reports tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Aiken. Unfortunately, Mark Dixon is not well. He's not here tonight, so it's just myself and Emile van Heinigen presenting. We have 3 items on the agenda tonight. Item 4.1 and 4.2, I'll be happy to take any questions on, and I'll introduce item 4.3. Item 4.3 is for Council to consider Amendment 143 to District Planning Scheme Number 2 to allow transport depot, motor vehicle repairs, storage yard and office as an additional use to lots 43 and 44 Wanneroo Road, Neerabup, following advertising. This amendment relates to about a 1.88 hectare portion of the 2 lots located on Wanneroo Road at the junction with Hester Avenue. Both lots are zoned general rural and have a combined total area of about 10.2 hectares. The site has a long history of operating as a transport depot over the front portion of the site. The City's records show that as far back as 1995, the City became aware that the use and requested the owners submit a development application for the transport depot, which at the time was capable of approval under Town Planning Scheme Number 1. However, at that time, no application was submitted, and therefore the site does not benefit from any non-conforming use approvals for this range of uses. The existing market garden use was approved on 6th of September 2000, which is still the use that occupies most of the site and will continue to do so if this amendment is approved by the Minister for Planning. While the City and the owner have been aware of the use and the need to obtain approval through a scheme amendment and subsequent development approval, no action was taken until August 2014, when the owner lodged an application to amend DPS2 to allow motor vehicle repairs, office, storage yard and transport depot on the site. And that was on the basis that it was a 5-year period of approval with the option for the City to grant a further approval for 5 years as a temporary measure. The proposal was initiated and approved by Council at its meeting on the 3rd of March 2015, and the application was then forwarded to the WAPC and EPA for consent to advertise, which was subsequently granted. The application was then advertised for comment over October and September 2015, with 6 submissions received, 1 letter of support and 5 letters from government agencies, raising no objections. Excuse me. It is apparent that the matter was then placed on hold by the City at that time, as there were investigations occurring into rezoning a significant portion of general rural zone land in the northern area of the City, which included the subject site. That investigation ultimately did not result in any rezoning of the land, and this amendment was subsequently left on hold indefinitely. Amendment 143 was not reactivated until the owner recently contacted the City about the matter. This delay in processing of the amendment by administration is regrettable, and I extend my apologies to Mr and Mrs Woolgrove. Administration has since implemented processes for ensuring all amendments are actively reviewed and progress to final determination. Administration has also confirmed that there are no other scheme amendments that remain unactioned. Given the time between the original advertising and the changes to the Planning and Development Act, the amendment was re-advertised for public comment. This occurred between the 26th of May and the 26th of July, with 3 submissions received from government agencies. The report sets out a range of technical issues that are all addressed in the comments. I will highlight that the site does not have direct access to Wanneroo Road, with access being via a parallel service road, which enables safe and effective access onto Wanneroo Road, and the City's traffic services have supported the proposal. Administration recommends Council support the proposal to allow the additional use for a 5-year period, with the ability to extend for a further 5 years at Council's discretion. This will allow sufficient time for the City to progress and finalise preparation of Local Planning Scheme number 3, which is intended to address the zoning of this area in a holistic manner. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Yes, Councillor Miles.
Thanks, you, Mayor. Thank you, Mr Bowring. Just a couple of questions, and as the report indicates, most of what the use on this site is wanting to be achieved is under Amendment 172. Is that correct?
Certainly, part of it will be resolved in that way, and may require further amendment or addressed further in Local Planning Scheme number 3 when that is prepared.
Okay, because one of the things that concerns me is only approving it for 5 years, and then the owner then has to come back to the City to request another change or another part of the amendment. So can you, under your conditions on page 130, there were 2 main parts that I was concerned with. One, in condition number 1, you're recommending that only 250 square metres be allowed for the repair of trucks. Can you explain why it's not a very large area, considering this is really a truck depot?
Thank you. Yeah, the limitation is to ensure that it doesn't become a primary activity on the site, and to contain it to that use that has already been established, and that's part of the application. So we are continuing with that. There hasn't been any approach that I'm aware of to modify that.
And the other part of that condition that concerns me, only on the basis on the fact that we're actually limiting employment by saying that they can only have, I think I read 4 persons to be working on site. Why would we even put that sort of stipulation in place? And does apprenticeships cover that? And are they considered an employee, or is that a training person? So I was just trying to understand why administration would want to limit it to 4 persons.
Again, thank you for the question. The same reason essentially is to contain that use, to make sure that it doesn't become a predominant use. Certainly outline it's consistent with the application, which we've supported, but certainly if there's a thought to remove that or to increase that number, then that certainly can be discussed.
But as part from what I understand, though, was the application not amended or upgraded for this time around, as opposed to in 2005 when it was originally put up? 2015, sorry.
I'm just cross-referencing back to page 119 and 120, which has the original resolution for advertising, which had the area limitation. But didn't have a limitation on staff numbers. which is in... Just cross-referencing the two. Continuation. I'm sorry, I'm not... Limitation, category 3. I may have to take just that detail on notice just to get back to you on whether or not we're actually seeking that constraint.
Okay, thank you. And my final question is under condition 2B, we're suggesting only a 5-year period, which is funny enough is what they was asking for back in 2015, and we're still sort of doing that northwest planning, and I'm assuming that's still going to take another 5, maybe 10 years. So I think 5 years is a bit too short. So I know you've got 5 years with an expiration and then a 5-year approval referral. How does the 5-year approval after the first 5 years happens? Do they have to go through an amendment again, or do they have to, is it just an automatic tick and flick by the planning people here, or how is that going to be granted?
Thank you. Under item C, a separate application for planning approval is required to be submitted for consideration. It would be through that same process to extend the timeframe, simply a development application, which would fulfil the requirement, to my understanding, as an extension of the timeframe.
Thank you, Councillor Miles. Councillor Baker put his hand up first, then you, Councillor Sabitten. So,
yeah,
Councillor Baker, would you
Thank
like
you,
to ask
Madam
a
Mayor.
question?
Just to follow on a series of questions from what Councillor Miles has raised, specifically dealing with the condition number 1 referred to on page 130 of the agenda, namely the employment cap of 4 persons. The word employing is used. That necessarily, I would have thought, excludes the proprietors of the business, the owners of the business, either as natural legal entities or as a company, and it would also exclude subcontractors, correct?
Yeah,
Just the word employing is used.
Yeah,
So the
it
answer
would
is
be
yes.
employees, yes.
So
correct.
on top of the 4, there could be 3 subbies employed there on a full-time basis, and the business may be owned by 5 people who are working the business.
Potentially.
Yeah, potentially. And if I can, please, ma'am, just another question regarding another agenda item 4.2, local planning policies due for review, page 49 of the agenda. On page 50 of the agenda, there's reference to...
Councillor Baker, we've gone on to another item on the agenda. We're still referred to this one.
So I thought we're dealing with all the matters within the jurisdiction.
No, we're
of the
just
office.
dealing with item 4.3
Okay,
at the
right.
moment.
Can we go back and deal with another one, an earlier one later or not? No.
Yes, we will. So, Councillor Sabitten, would you like to ask questions about this? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. In reference to item 2B, it appears to be 5 years with the option of another 5 years. But in essence, can that carry on from that point in time, or will they then have to put a new application in for the use? Because if it's 5-year increments, the additional use stands, do they have to come back to council? Thank you.
Yes, the terms of the amendment are that it would be approved for a 5-year term initially, and then at that time they would need to reapply for the further 5 years.
I'll do Vin first. Councillor Nguyen first. Thank you.
Do you know what the applicant's attitude is to the conditions in the recommendation?
Personally, no, I haven't actually spoken to the applicant myself, but I understand that that has been discussed and worked out with the applicant. I'm not sure that there's any objection to those.
Councillor Miles, did you want to ask a question?
Yeah, thanks. Sorry, Mayor. Just to go back to B and C, which from Councillor Savitton's question, if they have to put in a separate application after 5 years, is it another amendment that they're putting in at a substantial cost, or is it just a straightforward, like a DA of some sort?
Thank you, through you, Mayor Aitken. Yeah, that's correct. It's a DA. It's not a further scheme amendment.
Thank you. With that item finished, we'll move on to item 4.1. Are there any questions on item 4.1 tonight? Councillor Miles.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. The only question I had to the Director was, can you just clarify for my benefit the difference between a permanent structure and a temporary structure? I just want to understand, because everybody builds things out of whatever, but what are we classifying permanent and what is the classification for temporary?
Through you, Mayor. Yeah, so temporary refers to that you can actually relocate the facility or the building in accordance with the char map line. So when the erosion approaches that area, then that could potentially be relocated further inland so that it can be protected from erosion. So, for instance, at Shorehaven, there's a cafe there that's a temporary one because it's like in containers, although you can still use it as a restaurant, but that's temporary, as opposed to Eden Beach where the restaurant is permanent. But the main purpose of that is to make sure that you don't want to put permanent facilities where it's subject to erosion in the future.
Yeah, no, I understand that part. I was just trying to understand, so from administration's point of view, a temporary structure is something that can be easily relocated as opposed to something that would be built in place.
Through you, Mayor, that's correct. Or also I should have added is if it's in the life of that facility, so if that building will only last 10 years and the intent is for that it would be removed after 10 years, that could also be the life of that. But generally, we refer to the actual ability to relocate it.
No more questions? Okay, we'll move on to item 4.2. Thank you. Yes, Councillor Baker.
Sorry?
You can ask your questions, Councillor Baker.
Thanks, mate. Just a question regarding 4.2, specifically the review of planning policy 2.2, caravan parks, camping grounds, park home parks, LPP 2.2, page 50. One of the justifications in the report for wholly revoking this policy is, amongst other things, because, and I quote from the bottom of page 50, LP 2.2 is out of date and no longer necessary for the following reasons. Number one, the planning outcomes that LP 2.2 sets out to achieve, seeks to achieve is better managed through the Caravan Parks and Camping Grounds Act 1995 and related regulations, correct? That is correct? Reading that correctly?
Yeah, yes, that's correct.
Yep, whereas the, in terms of the policy referred to, it was implemented on 14, or adopted, or first passed in the first instance, I gather, on 14 March 2000, well after the commencement date of that act that I just referred to. That policy was reviewed on 4 December 2004, and I assume that review was conducted. The next review, as per the policy manual, says December 2006, but if it was reviewed, if that policy was reviewed on that month and during that year, but surely it would have been, well, reviewed by now, I would have thought. But the point is this, that even after that act was passed in any event anyway, which is the part of the primary reason why the policy should be revoked, nonetheless, some 5 years after that passage of that legislation and related regs, we introduced the policy in March 2000, we reviewed it on 4 December 2004, and apparently again on December 2006, although that updated policy document's not there. How's the need changed given that the Act, well, as I understand it, has not been significantly amended since it was first passed back in 1995, some 5 years before we even adopted a policy, please?
Thank you. The review of the policy is looking at whether or not it's still serving a planning purpose. And it's apparent that on review of it now, after some time, that it may never have actually really been necessary in light of the caravan and camping regulations. And it is at times, sometimes planning policy is prepared to serve a perceived planning issue or a planning purpose.
Right, so that you're saying at the outset the policy wasn't even necessary by virtue of the fact that the Act and associated regulations covered the field, so to speak, subject to general planning principles, of course, common sense planning principles.
I'm not aware of the actual provisions of the Act and the regulations at that time it was adopted. It may have been that it has been amended over time.
Fair enough. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Councillor Huntley.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Can I just ask a question about the local planning policy 3.3 fauna management? And in paragraph 2, it does actually say a maximum of 3 weeks once fencing is erected that the management plan has to be exercised. And then obviously developers can actually have a chat and extend that time. But could we actually make that time 5 weeks instead of 3? It's just that in the summer, if you get a 40-degree week, then that week's taken out. There's absolutely no way they can move fauna in 40-degree temperatures. So that reduces it then to 2 weeks, and that could be a bit tight, especially when we're talking of actually trying to manage hundreds of animals rather than just simply 20 or 30 animals.
Through you, Mayor. So the administration believes that 3 weeks is adequate. This policy is to focus mainly on kangaroos and emus. So we believe that 3 weeks should be adequate for that. But of course, we will deal with it on a case-by-case basis. So if an applicant requests additional time, we would be happy to consider that. But also it's open to council to consider to extend that time frame to 5 weeks when council consider the policy next week.
Thank you. Okay. Can I foreshadow an amendment to that, please?
Yes.
Thank you.
Is that all the questions? Yes, Councillor Miles.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. Just on the telecommunications one, Mr. Bowring, now I'd just like it for public attention, why we actually want to hold this policy over for another 2.5 years. It's so administration can do what with telecommunications?
So we were in the schedule to review it this year, but in the meantime we've had an appeal against a determination by council to refuse a phone tower in Alkimos, which was subsequently overturned on appeal. From that we've learnt some lessons which we would like to then work through with both the development industry and the telecommunications industry and try and work out an effective policy strategy to manage the rollout of telecommunications infrastructure in the northwest, in Wanneroo generally, particularly focusing on trying to address that at the early planning stages so that it's not a surprise for the community once an area is established.
So with that said, you're possibly looking to maybe able to insert tower locations or in and around within the structure plans? Is that what you're attempting to try and do?
That may be an outcome, and we've scheduled a workshop with land developers and the telecommunications industry, and we'll have an attendance from a senior officer from the Department of Planning as well, talk about this at a technical forum in a few weeks' time. So that may be an outcome, but we're not sure yet.
Thank you. And I'd like to thank Mr Bowring and Mr van der Heijn for being here this evening. We move on to assets now, and I'd like the Director, Harminder Singh, to come and join us at the table and speak to any items he wishes to speak to tonight.
Thank you, Mayor. From Assets Directorate, I have 2 items on the agenda tonight, and I'm not planning to present any of those items, but will be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, are there any questions for any items? Yes, Councillor Rowe.
Thank you, Mayor. And apologies, there's a series of questions about 4.4 just because it's 6 months in the making. Mr Singh, the first question I have about the bus shelters is what level of consultation, if any, did the PTA have with the city before they decided to relocate the stops and remove the bus shelters?
Thank you. Through you, Mayor. PTA normally advises the city when they're making these kind of changes. And in this instance, also, they advised us about 6 weeks before they actually moved those bus stops and shelters.
To the best of your knowledge, Mr Singh, is the PTA aware that one of its relocated stops presents a significant road safety issue, and this is the stop that's immediately before Nelligan Avenue?
Yeah, through you, Mayor, yes, we understand that PTA undertook a safety assessment of the new location which was being proposed, and after the stop became operational, and they determined that there was some location just which is south of Nelligan Avenue and would provide a safer environment for all road users. That's the reason they are relocating. So they thought the further relocated position would be more safer.
Just as a statement, it's somewhat frustrating given that was the public feedback that came before the decision was announced. The third question, has the PTA, I suppose that's been answered. The fourth one, is the PTA partly covering the costs incurred by either the construction materials or the labour associated with the reinstallation of the bus shelters?
Through you, Mayor, this report mentioned there are 2 bus shelters being mentioned in this report. One, which is there is no objections, is under at the moment under planning by the PTA. They're looking at constructing that from 12th of September. For that particular bus shelter, City of Wanneroo is paying for the actual cost of the shelter, whereas PTA is funding all the labour and the hard stand works, so all other materials and labour. Whereas for the other shelter, which is subject to council decision next week to support its construction, after council makes a decision, we will then consult with PTA, see if we can negotiate a shared contribution from both parties.
Given that road resurfacing works are going on at the moment on Blackmore Avenue and Kelly Road, which is the side road adjacent to Blackmore Park, will that disrupt the reinstallation timeframes subject to this report being endorsed by council next week?
Through you, Mayor, we don't anticipate that to be the case. Should there be any overlap of 2 contractors, we will be able to manage their timeframes. There may be some minor adjustments which may be required, but I don't expect them to be massive interruptions.
And then the final question is, I don't intend to foreshadow an amendment to this, but if it's possible for administration to write to the PTA just to articulate the experience of some of the local residents, given the fact of articulating how long it's been that they've been without access to a shelter and the fact that they were standing in the cold and in the rain for the entirety of winter. So if that could be done, I'd appreciate it.
Through you, Mayor, yes, we do work very closely with PTA and we'll be happy to write to them to conveying that community sentiments.
Thank you, Councillor Baker.
Thank you through the chair to Harminder Singh. Harminder, just a query regarding paragraph number 2 on page 138 of the report associated with this agenda item. It refers to, of course, the PTA undertaking works to upgrade, etc., and relocate. What are the criteria used by the PTA when deciding which particular bus stops need to be upgraded or relocated? Are you aware of what their general criteria is, or is it just common sense? I don't know. They must have a policy, I assume, a policy on a policy, so to speak. Thanks.
Through the Mayor, my understanding is with PTA, they do review the bus routes constantly, and depending upon the usage from each bus stop, they try to rationalize and relocate some of those bus stops. That's what happened in this instance. There were 2 stops, and they have introduced a 3rd one to make it like an even spread of those bus stops in that particular street.
Thank you. Councillor Miles, please.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. Just a question on page 139, the bus stop 28575, which is on just south of Nanovich Avenue, the residents have obviously complained that they don't want to have the antisocial behaviour or litter and all associated that could possibly happen by having a bus stop outside their home. Administration's suggesting that they will regularly empty the bin and have ranger patrols. Ranger patrols regular, I think our ranger services stop patrolling about 9 o'clock. So how does that get dealt with in the antisociable hours that it may happen?
Through the Mayor, I think the mitigation measures we suggested in this report are a normal course of action. Should there be any antisocial element escalate in that particular location, obviously residents may have to contact the local police if the incident warrants that. The suggestions which are made in this report are just normal course of action which we will undertake.
Just to further on that, being that both the photos from, I think it's Google Maps that have been placed in the report, both of those bus stops are very near a power line. Has administration looked at possibly putting a CCTV camera on that particular one to alleviate the concerns of the residents nearby?
Through you, Mayor, the answer is no. We haven't considered that, and that's normally the case with bus shelters. That's not generally the provision we make, given that it's a project in its own right then.
Mr Singh, I would like to ask a question. Could you find out what time the buses stop going past there at what time of night, so that whether you would have people getting off at unsocial times of the night, so when the bus shelter ceases to be of effect? Thank you.
Yes, through you, Mayor, yes, we can include that in the notes from this briefing session.
Any more questions? Okay. Moving on to item 4.5, remembering we have a confidential attachment to this, and should there be any discussion required for confidential attachment 1, then the doors must be closed and members of the public must exit the chambers. Are there any questions on item 4.5? No questions. I'll move on to community and place. Thank you, Mr Singh.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Mrs Terrelling.
I have a declaration on this one, on one of these.
Which item is that, Councillor Miles?
It's 4.7.
Okay. Maybe we can do 4.7 first. Would you like to make your declaration?
Yeah, thank you. With regard to item 4.7, I disclose that I am Commodore of the Sun City Yacht Club, and as a consequence, there may be a perception that my impartiality on the matter may be affected, and I declare that I will consider this matter on its merits and vote accordingly.
Thank you. Mrs Terrelling.
Thank you, Mayor. There are 4 items this evening from the Community in Place Directorate, and I'm proposing to briefly introduce item 4.7 and also note that there's just a minor administrative amendment that we'll make to the terms of reference for the Wanneroo Town Centre Advisory Group in item 4.9, and that just relates to the method for the distribution of the meeting agenda and minutes. So in relation to item 4.7, the City has been approached by the State Heritage Council, who are considering the proposed entry onto the State Register of the Sun City precinct. As the local government that is associated with that particular precinct, the City has been invited by the Department of Planning, Lands and Heritage to provide comments and feedback to the Heritage Council's proposal for listing. So the proposed, the precinct itself is formed of 7 particular sites, if you like. So there's the Two Rocks Marina, the Two Rocks Shopping Centre, the Two Rocks Tavern, the Limestone Retaining Wall, the Woggle Monoliths, the King Neptune statue, and the site of the former Atlantis Marine Park. These places are actually currently listed in various management categories in the city's local heritage survey, and the comments that are proposed to be submitted to the Heritage Council align with the information that the city has available on those sites that has previously been in the local heritage survey. And the intention is to support the listing by the Heritage Council, and also just include some information that we have available with the comments that are included in attachment 4.
Thank you, Ms Terrelink. Are there any questions? Thank you, Councillor Baker.
Thank you, through the Chair, Madam Mayor, to Ms Terrelink. Ms Terrelink, is it possible in the report to incorporate a summary of the community consultation feedback in relation to this precinct as a whole, in particular in relation to the Woolworths DA that was dealt with by the city several months ago? And is it also possible to incorporate within the report a copy of the amendment to the city's responsible authority report in respect of that Woolies DA that was passed, if I recall, unanimously in this chamber several months ago? Is it possible, just for the sake of completeness, to spin effect say, Heritage Commission, we agree, this is all historically correct, of course, what you incorporated, but also so the Heritage Commission also understands the full nature and extent of the fervour that the community has for this whole precinct, not just the King Neptune statue, but the whole precinct. I think just to indicate that the community is, rock solid on this. It's not something that's arguable or we support it narrowly, unanimously. I would have thought we support the heritage. Thank you. Is that possible?
Through the Chair, I might defer to the Acting Director of Planning and Sustainability, but I understand it is possible, yes.
Thank you, through you, Mayor Aiken. That's correct. We can include all of that information that was a result of the advertising and the Council's resolution in that submission.
Thank you, Greg.
Councillor Svitten.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. If this is recognised as a heritage site, and considering there are structure plans in place, will there or will there not be, I guess, any impact on development under the structure plan if it comes up? And I guess this is in recognition of heritage only and not what the actual structure plan say. Is that, I hope that's okay, yes.
Would that be able to go through to Mr Bowring? Thank you.
Sorry, I missed the question. Apologies.
Councillor Svitten, if you want to.
Thank you. Considering we may be accepting this as a heritage site through the Heritage Council, and considering there are structure plans in place, will there be any impact on those structure plans under the development which is prescribed under the structure plan in the future, even though we may recognise this as a heritage site? Thank you, Greg.
My apologies. Yes, there will be additional consideration because the status would change at a state level, which would require consideration of any development that occurs within the precinct if it becomes added to the state register. And Heritage Council would need to be referred any development that occurs that may affect those sites or the values of that place. That would go to also preventing any sort of exemptions that currently exist for minor works. So all development would now need to come to for development approval.
Yes, Councillor Baker.
Through the Chair to Mr Bowring, just by way of clarification, beyond any reasonable doubt. So the listing will have a bearing upon the current structure plans and any future new structure plans or amended structure plans within the precinct, correct?
Mr Bowring.
That's correct, yes.
Excellent, thank you.
Councillor Sangalli.
Thank you. I did speak briefly to the staff just before the meeting just about this. Just reflecting back on the city's actual commentary that we are putting in on the submission, to me, although everything there, the facts are all there, it hasn't quite captured what the memory of Atlantis and the Two Rocks area meant for not just the local community, but statewide and even Australia-wide. And being that this is a state register, it's not a local community register, I think it's worthy of mentioning, you know, the frequency that it appears in Lost Perth, the frequency that the museum promotes it, the displays that we put on in our own museum, the fact that it's not only that we do these things, but the interaction that occurs once we do that, because by far, every time Atlantis or the Two Rocks Marina and Alan Bond and the America's Cup is mentioned, there is an awful lot of interaction that happens around that. It's a very popular topic, and it's a topic that extends much further than just Two Rocks and Yanship. It goes out throughout the whole of WA and even Australia-wide and internationally. We've seen international Instagram photos of King Neptune and everything as well. So I just think it's worth us actually investing some wording in what it invokes in people and including that as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Would you like to comment on that, Mr.?
Thank you, Mayor. I think Ms Terrellink's indicated she can incorporate the interaction element of the experience as well as the physical heritage experience.
Councillor Rowe?
Thank you, Mayor. And I've had a conversation, an email chain with Director Terrellink today. Just two questions on it, and it's in relation to the Woggle monoliths. Is it possible that we can recommend to the Heritage Council to have some level of consultation with the local Indigenous people about those sculptures?
Through you, Mayor, yes, that is certainly possible. I understand from conversations that Councillor Rowe has had that there could be some sensitivities with those. So certainly we can flag that in our comments and suggest to the Heritage Council that they do their own research and consultation with the local Aboriginal community to understand what that might mean for them.
And the second part of the question is, given we have a strong community reference group, is it possible for to be included as an item of discussion at the next meeting?
Through you, Mayor, we can certainly discuss it with our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community reference group, just noting that the comments actually close on the 30th of September, so we will flag, though, in our comments to the Heritage Council that there could be some sensitivities and ask them to deal with that appropriately.
Any more questions on this item? Okay, we'll move on to item 4.6, the community groups policy. Are there any questions on this? Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. My questions are directed to Deputy Terrelling. In relation to the establishment fund that was utilised by the Yanship Men's Shed, who contributed to that fund? Because my understanding is that it was a state grant that was provided. I may have misconstrued it, or was provided to the group by the city, maybe. In other words, in terms of the money that was, or the funding that was provided towards the actual cost of the rent of that facility, was that wholly or partially funded by the state or by the city of Wanneroo, please?
Through you, Mayor, the establishment fund was wholly funded by the city of Wanneroo.
And are you aware of any state grants of any description that the state government provided to that group to facilitate their occupation, etc., of their current premises, please?
Through you, Mayor, they may have received some grants for equipment, but I'm not aware that they've received any other funding towards the cost of the rental.
Thank you. Thank you.
Any more questions on this item? If there are none, we'll move on to item 4.8, the Department of Local Government, Sport and Cultural Industries 2023-24 funding round. Any questions on this item? Yes, Councillor Rowe.
Thank you, Mayor. Just in terms of the Kingsway Little Athletics kiosk, on page 212 of the agenda proper, it says that construction will commence in mid-2023 at the earliest, and this is a delay. I just wanted to flag whether this was just due to the cost escalations or if there was another factor in play that was causing the delay in construction beginning.
Yes, thank you. Through you, Mayor. The issue is that we won't know until, I believe, early next year that the CSR, well, whether the CSRFF application has been successful, and we actually can't start construction until we know about that grant. So that's the reason for the delay.
And the second part of that question, if the city is successful in receiving the grant and it's hoping that construction will start in mid-2023, is it anticipated that the kiosk would be open for the start of the Little Athletics season in October? Could that be a time frame that we'd be working towards, given that it's a busy period of access for that whole centre?
Through you, Mayor, it's probably unlikely that it would be finished that quickly.
Thank you. Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Mayor. I've just got two questions with regards to this. One of them is sort of just the program in general. Is there any reason why we don't put in a lot of the projects in, because it is, I guess, a pool, you know, based on a set of criteria. So we may get, you know, more funds if we put in 3 or 4 different projects. So we're actually maximising the use of doing our submissions for the city. That's my first question. And my second question was in regards to, was Edgar Griffiths Park also
Councillor
for...
Wright, can we just let Mrs Terrelink answer the first question and then move on to the second one?
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you, through you, Mayor. So in relation to the applications, we normally would have more than one application for each of these particular programs. It is a case, though, that some of the programs where we are seeking additional funding, we've already received CSRFF funding and we can't double dip, so to speak, so we can't go back with those projects. The other issue comes down to the timing of the projects. It needs to fit in with our timeframes in terms of the delivery of the project. So we certainly look to include as many projects as we can that meet the eligibility criteria. It's just that for this round of funding, we only have these 2 particular projects, but we would normally have more than those. The projects that we have got outstanding at the moment are either not ready yet to fit with the timing of the funding, or, as I've indicated, they're already receiving a level of funding and we can't put them in again.
Thank you, Ms Terrelink. Councillor Wright.
Thank you. And my second question was in regards to Edgar Griffiths Park, and actually why this wasn't considered as an application due to the local sporting groups in that area, particularly around the parking and the lighting upgrades. Was there any reason why that was not identified as a project for this round?
Through you, Mayor. So in relation to parking is actually not, doesn't meet the eligibility criteria for the CSRFF funding. In regard to the lighting at the facility is actually relatively new, and it's only just recently come to our attention that there is some desire by the clubs to upgrade the lighting. So that is certainly something that we can consider for the next round of funding, if it's not something that can be included within the city's own budget.
Any more questions on this item? Thank you. We'll move on to item 4.9, revised terms of reference for the Wanneroo Town Centre Advisory Group. Are there any questions on this item? No questions? Okay, we move on to corporate strategy and performance. Thank you, Director Jennings. If you could come down and speak to what you wish to speak to.
Thank you, Mayor and councillors. There are 3 items on this part of the agenda this evening. I do want to just mention something briefly on 4.10, but also mention that there are 2 late reports that I'll be bringing to the council member, the council meeting rather, one being about an extraordinary election for the North East Ward and the other for a service review working group terms of reference, because we need to do that one a bit quicker than waiting for another council meeting. So I apologise that those two will be late, but if I could just mention something about the financial activity statement, please. So if I could please draw your attention to the recommendation on page 247 and 248. You will see that there are some capital works changes to be made, most of which are minor. There are some government grants that we're also receiving to bring into the budget. And there is one where we've had to adjust between operating and capital. You may remember that the Australian standard for capital for software as a service has required us to change a bit of the way we do the budgeting, so we're just still right-sizing that actually, so hence one of the changes, but I'm happy to take any questions on the statements.
Any questions on item 4.10? Councillor Baker.
Thank you. Through the chair to Ms Jennings. I have a question regarding a paragraph on page 247. The paragraph 2, additional acquisition, makes reference to, it's the third panel down, PR 4065, Moore Park Avenue, Yanchep, new acquisition of land. Where is that acquisition located? Why was an acquisition necessary? And does that proposed acquisition have to be advertised in accordance with the Act, please? It says acquisition of land. I assume it must be a very small parcel of unimproved land if the amount sought is $40,000. And the description states works determined to be operational in nature. I'm not sure what's meant by that term too. Thanks.
Thank you, Mayor. There is some detail on pages 243 and 244 for each of these items, and you have obviously noticed that particular one. We are, as you may remember with Moore Park, there's a few bits and pieces that we need to just line up to be able to have that all work for the community there. I will get you a bit more detail on that particular one, just so that I can explain it a bit further. Yeah.
Just if I can, a supplementary, please, Madam Mayor.
Yes.
So that expenditure bears no relationship to the city's prior acquisition of certain cul-de-sac lots of land, parcels of land, along Moore Park, which parcels of land that the adjacent residents thought would be used as interconnecting streets with the residential urbanised development immediately to the west of the westernmost properties along Moore Park Avenue. Correct. It doesn't bear any relationship to those various parcels of land.
Through to the Mayor, I believe that is related slightly, but it's only minor. I'll just get you a bit more detail on it. So,
thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Miles.
Yeah, Mayor, just Ms Jennings, on page 240, we're talking about the utility charges. We've got a difference of $540,000 and it just says a timing difference. What do you mean by the timing difference? So we've got a budgeted amount of $188,000 and the actual bill is $773,000, and it's just got a line there to say due to a timing difference of actual street lights. Do we pay for street lights annually, quarterly? Is that what we're referring to here?
thank you. Through the Mayor. This is the financial statements for the July period. I think what's happened is that something's come in a bit earlier than we expected that we might have thought would have gone into August. So hence why we say a timing issue. We don't expect, if you have a look actually at the graph, you'll see that our July bill, we didn't really expect that much. But when you consider how much is in August, it's probably smoother than we originally thought it would be.
Any more questions? I'd like to move on to Business and Finance 4.11, Warrant of Payments. Yes, Councillor Baker,
thank you through the Chair.
remembering that there is the preference to contact the Director before the meeting if you have questions on the Warrant of Payments.
I accept that, Madam
you.
Mayor. I was a tad busy this afternoon, I'm sorry. I'll just be a moment. Yes, just a question to Nolene regarding page 267 of the warrants of payments. 267, item number 3 from the top. Item number 7148, dates 11 July 2022. The payee is was Edith Cowan University. The subject matter, research project - investigating the impact of an increasingly urbanised catchment on the Yalagonga wetlands, approximately $20,000. In reference to a local government's mandatory obligations under the Local Government Act, I would have thought that that particular research project would be the responsibility of the state government through the Waters and Rivers Commission, but certainly not us. What legislative, how do I put it, responsibility do we bear for, to quote, investigating the impact of an increasingly urbanised catchment on the Yalagonga wetlands? I would have thought that that subject matter is fairly and squarely a state responsibility. What are your views, please? Thank you.
Through the Mayor, it's not really about my views, but I do know that we have a tripartite agreement with the Department of Biodiversity and also the City of Joondalup and ourselves to take some care of the actual lakes. Also, part of that is the Smart Cities water quality work, and you may remember that Edith Cowan University is a partner in our Smart Cities project. So we're continuing to sample the lake to actually build our data into a twin lake so that we can actually have a data copy of the lake. So there's a couple of things there related to the work we do together.
So supplementary, please, Madam Mayor. So the obligation to pay arises out of an agreement between another local government authority and a state government agency, correct? In other words, it's an agreement, a contractual agreement. There's nothing we're compelled to do, well, except for the law of contract, of course. Is that the case? Thanks.
Through the Mayor, it's obviously there's been a long-standing agreement between the parties to help with the health of the lake.
Councillor Baker, just remember this is about the payments that we've made, okay? We can ask the other questions later. Any more questions on the warrant of payments? Thank you. Okay, we'll move on to, we can do this next week, the 4.12, the appointment of delegate to Walga North. Thank you, Ms Jennings. And now I'd like to ask Mr Sims to talk about the Chief Executive Office items for tonight.
Thank you, Mayor. Of the 3 items before the council briefing session tonight, 4.13 has been discussed at a previous forum, and 4.14 and 4.15 are self-explanatory. I'm happy to take questions on all items.
Any questions on item 4.13? No questions. Any questions on 4.14? No questions. Any items on 4.15? No questions. I'd like to move on to motions on notice, of which we have none. Wait a minute, we do have one. It's item 6.1, not under item 5. That's a motion on notice for Councillor Nguyen, and that will come at the next meeting. Item 6, late reports to be circulated under a separate cover. And Ms Jennings has. So we now have public question time. And at public question time we have Dot Newton. Mrs Dot Newton, if you'd like to take the stand, please.
Madam Mayor, if I may, please, just a point of clarification. My understanding is that we do have 2 late reports. The relevant council director has not made a presentation yet.
That's correct.
Is that because we're going behind closed doors to consider the terms of the contents of those late reports or not?
No, it's because they have to be done in a time frame to be done. That's all.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mrs Newton.
Thank you. My name is Dot Newton and I live in Wanneroo. I'd like to ask your indulgence to pass on a personal congratulation. Can I do that? I'd like to congratulate all the candidates that stood in the mayoral election, and particularly those that didn't add to the visual pollution along our roads. Thank you that you didn't all put signs out, because I'm allergic to them. Thank you.
Thank you,
the
Mrs.
questions I
Newton.
have are 4.3 regarding the storage reference. In the report on page 127, I was shocked to read that somebody thinks that the Neerabup Industrial Estate is a suitable site for a storage facility. I hate the fact that that's in there. I want to know why, because Neerabup Industrial Estate is supposed to be our next employment hub. A storage facility will employ how many people? We've just established maybe 4. So why is that in the report?
Thank you, Mrs. Newton. Mr. Bowring.
Thank you, through you, Mayor Aiken. Storage yard is a use that's capable of approval, and that's simply mentioned there as a use that can be located in Neerabup. That's currently the case in our general industrial zone.
Might need to rewrite that bit then. I would say, just in jest, that in 2 reports tonight, there are 23 references to storage in that report, and there are 31 overall tonight, and 28 times the environmental word is used. When you're doing a search word, it's quite staggering. My question on 4.5 is, are all tenders worded the same? Because this particular tender is about installing lighting on playing fields, and within the tender it refers to subclause C, which is the RAP, and subclause D, which is employment and facilities for people with disabilities. I think that's totally inappropriate in that tender, and I want to know why it's in all the tenders if it is.
Mrs. Jennings.
Thank you, Mayor. That is our standard criteria. I'm just trying to have a look at it. Sorry.
I note that it's given a really low rating, but the people that are putting in that tender have to answer those questions, and it's totally inappropriate for what they're tendering for. That is a personal opinion. My next questions are related to the warrant of payments. Items 7111, so 7111 and 7784 both talk about a councillor's travel, and they both say June 2022. So I'm hoping there's an error there, because I can't see that particular councillor putting 2 travel applications in for the same month. I'll just leave that for someone to look at, but this is a question I would like to know what the policy is on travel allowance, because 7119 has 2 months from last year and 3 months from last year, which was all the last financial year. So what is the policy with claiming travel allowance? When I was an elected member, many years ago, we had to put them in each month. There was no holding it over to put in 5 months at once, and that's going to carry over to this financial year. The subsequent question to that is, the councillors that don't put in any applications throughout the year, what happens to the money that's allocated in the budget for that purpose?
Mrs. Jennings.
Thank you, through the Mayor. Certainly the policy is to have regular travel allowance claims, so preferably monthly. However, under the legislation, there's no actual date. So should someone put in a later claim, we're obliged to pay them. If, on the other question, I think, was what happens if someone doesn't put in any money, then it's a saving claim rather than that money is a saving.
Any more questions, Mrs. Newton?
Under the legislation, I do understand that you have to pay it, but you have to pay it in the following financial year. Supposing every councillor around this table held on for 6 or 7 months, thingy, what would the budget do then? So I might look into that, but I'm surprised that you can carry that over. So, and I know your annual reports don't accurately reflect at the end of a financial year what has been claimed then. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs Newton. We now go to item 8, which is confidential. We don't have any confidential, and so we move on to item 9, which is the date of the next meeting. The next ordinary council meeting has been scheduled for 6 p.m. on Tuesday the 13th of September 2022 to be held at the Council Chamber, Civic Centre, 23 Dundebar Road, Wanneroo. Item 10 is closure of the meeting, and I declare the meeting closed at 7:06 p.m. Thank you, everyone.